Hey guys, I wanted to walk through a very important topic in Theme 3 in regulation, which is price caps. Both what it is, how to work out questions, etc. So firstly, price caps. The name itself is a massive giveaway. A price cap is where the regulator, the CMA, or the government, which is interchangeable by the way, place a limit on how much a firm is allowed to raise its price by. Yeah. They would typically do this, by the way, for natural monopolies, because in natural monopoly, you're the only provider of that good or service. There's literally no competition, and therefore it's up to you. You could just charge whatever you want. So let's go through the two types of price caps and understand it on a mathematical basis. So let's say the first is called RPI minus X. Now, reminder from theme 2, what is RPI? Well, RPI is the retail price index, which is a measure of inflation in the economy. So if we make up an example, let's say that hypothetically in a given year, RPI happens to be 5%. Let's go 5%. Okay. If RPI is 5%, you as a firm, when I tell you that everything around you is 5% more expensive, what would you want to do to the price that you charge for your good or service? You would obviously want to raise it by at least 5%, right? The regulator intervene here and go, you're not allowed. They're going to set an X, and we'll talk about why and what the X represents, but let's just make up a number and let's do it as 1%. So the regulators say to you, you're only allowed to raise your price by whatever this formula comes to, RPI minus X. So if we plug it in, what do we get? 5 minus 1, obviously 4%. Now, the harder question is that in nominal terms, you can raise your price 4% in nominal terms or in real terms. Most of the time when I ask this question, people incorrectly tell me real terms, and I get it because of the fact that there's RPI involved. So you go, there's inflation involved. I factored inflation in. No, and the reason why is as follows. If I take a very simple example, so let's say that this firm is initially charging £100 for this particular product, yeah? And now RPI is 5%, X is 1%. So the maximum that this firm is allowed to raise its price by is 4%. Therefore, they raise their price to £104. That change in the price is nominal because whatever the change in the price is, that is always nominal. To work out real, you need to actually plug it into a second formula. And that second formula, which is very important to recognize, is this. Real will always equal nominal minus inflation. Okay. So if I want to work out real terms, I'm going to need to basically plug it into this formula, yeah? Okay. Let's work it out based on our made-up example here. In our made-up example over here, we just said that in nominal terms, this firm is raising its price by 4%. Minus, okay, what was inflation though? Well, inflation in my made-up example was RPI was 5%, it was 5%. So you get 4% minus 5%. What does that equal to? That equals to minus 1%. Right, let's make sense of what just happened. That means that in this example here, where RPI minus X, 5% minus and 1%, the firm is only allowed to raise its price by a maximum of 4% in nominal terms. But when I factor in the inflation rate, they are worse off in real terms by 1%. Okay. What must this firm therefore do to ensure they are not worse off in real terms? Remind me of the formula of profit right at the beginning of theme 3. You should all know that profit is equal to TR, total revenue, minus total cost. Okay. If this firm is capped in terms of how much they can actually increase their price, in other words, their revenue is probably going to be capped now, what must this firm therefore do to ensure they are not worse off in real terms? Well, if I can't raise my revenue more than, let's say, 4% in this example, I have to cut my costs by exactly whatever X is, 1%. The X, therefore, by the way, represents X inefficiency. It's the idea that because there's literally no competition in the market, if it were left to you, you'd be so complacent and lazy. The regulator, therefore, forces you. They say, okay, listen, if you want to keep making profits in real terms, the same as you're currently making right now, no problemo, but you have to hit that X factor. That X is 1%. You need to cut your cost by exactly 1%. Now, the clever thing about this form of regulation is that it doesn't just incentivize the firm to cut the cost by 1%. They actually have the incentive to cut their cost by more than 1%. Because if I cut my cost, let's say, by 2%, in real terms, I'm now 1% better off. Let's understand why. Because here, when inflation is 5%, I'm only allowed to raise my price by a maximum of 4%. So I raise my revenue by 4%. If I cut my cost by 2%, that's 6%. Minus the inflation rate of 5%, I'm therefore 1% better off. In a nutshell, then, the X represents the efficiency savings that a firm must make. Otherwise, they are worse off in real terms. It's encouraging firms to become more efficient. That's our first form of regulation. And just to clarify again, by the way, when you put it into the formula RPI minus X, whatever you come out with the first time, whatever that basically adds up to or minuses to, will always be nominal. It will always be the change in nominal terms. And to get real, you need to plug it into this formula now. Real equals nominal minus inflation. Right, let's make sense of this with the second form of price cap. Let's clear the page. The second type of price cap is called RPI plus K. So RPI plus K. Okay, very straightforward. What now happens is the regulators say to you, all right, you're allowed to raise your price above inflation, but only by whatever we set as K. And I'll go through a mathematical example in a second. But the added caveat here is that the firm is obligated legally to invest at least whatever K percentage is into capital machinery, like into new technology, new like machines, etc. So again, let's make sense with an example. So if I go, okay, RPI in a given year, let's say is 7%. And let's assume the regulator has set a K of 2%. What does that mean? Well, that means the upper limit of what this firm can raise its price by is 7 plus 2, which is obviously very easy maths, 9%. The firm can only raise its price by a limit, so still a cap, of 9%. But now, whatever profit they make, they have to invest at least 2% of it into capital machinery. So again, by the way, if I do it in terms of nominal and real terms, what's happening here? So in nominal terms, it's just 7 plus 2 is equal to 9%. If I plug it into the formula I wrote out earlier, real equals nominal minus inflation. Well, in this context, you have the following. You go, nominal went up by 9%, minus inflation, well, the inflation rate is RPI, is 7%. This firm is therefore better off in real terms by 2%, but they have to invest 2% of their profits into capital machinery. This ensures this firm remains dynamically efficient. When they've done this in the past, by the way, with Thames Water, they have opted for RPI plus K rather than RPI minus X. The problem with RPI minus X is that it might encourage firms to actually cut costs, but they might cut it in wrong areas. Like imagine they don't do as many checks on the pipes and the water gets contaminated, blah, blah, blah. Whereas RPI plus K, we basically say, okay, people are going to pay more for their water over time in real terms, but the quality of the water should be going up because of the fact the firm has to keep investing whatever percentage K is into capital machinery and technology. Okay, so again, reminder, when I work out nominal, it is always RPI minus X or RPI plus K. You just plug it into the formula. Whatever you churn out is in nominal terms. And then you plug it into this formula, real minus is equal to nominal minus inflation, to work out what it is in real terms. Right, park that thought in your head. Let's do a past paper together. So if I unshare this, close the whiteboard. I think one of the most difficult questions they have ever asked is June 2016 Old Spec, Unit 3, question number 8. And we're going to do it together. So let's open up the paper and have a look. And hopefully if you get this right, it means that you fully understand this concept. So here we go. Question number 8 is here. It says, in 2014, the UK government announced that there would be a change in the price cap on regulated rail fare increases. The price cap changed from RPI plus 1% to RPI plus 0. Assuming RPI changes are positive, regulated fares will. Right, this is really badly worded in my opinion. Because the whole concept, firstly, are we dealing with RPI minus X, RPI plus K? We're obviously dealing with RPI plus K because we have a plus here. The whole thing about how the price cap used to be RPI plus 1 is utterly irrelevant to the question. The question is now just saying to you that RPI plus 0 is what we're dealing with. So in other words, if I write it up over here, so I'll go, we've got RPI plus K, RPI plus K, and the K happens to be equal to 0%. Okay. What we're not told is what the inflation rate is, but we are told, importantly, and this is why it's important to underline keywords in a question like this or in like a multiple choice question, is that RPI changes are positive. That sentence, by the way, is really important because if it didn't say that, option E would have been correct. And a lot of people chose option E. It can't be E. Let me rule out E straight away. It says fall by an amount equal to the changes in RPI. It can't fall because RPI must be positive. So it cannot be E. So let's deal with what the question is. That's a very good idea for you guys to pause the video at this stage, attempt it yourself, and then compare your answer to what the answer actually is. Yeah? So assuming that you've come back to me now, it says A, rise by 1% in nominal terms. Okay, well, it depends though. We don't know what inflation is, but if I told you that, let's say inflation was, let's make up a number. So let's say inflation was equal to 4% in a given year. So let's say RPI is equal to 4%. The first thing I need to do is I plug it into my formula, and whatever I get out, remember that is in nominal terms, the change in nominal terms. So let's do it. So we go in nominal, is equal to, well, the 4%, whatever RPI is, plus, well, K here is 0%. It makes our life very easy. 4 plus 0 plus is equal to obviously 4. In other words, in nominal terms, when inflation was 4%, in nominal terms, it went up by 4%. It can't be A. A is only true if I know that RPI is exactly so what 1%. And I don't know that. All I know is RPI is positive, but it could be any number. It could be 1, it could be 2, it could be 10, it could be 20, right? So it can't be A because A is only true in the event that RPI is exactly equal to 1%. Right. B, rise by 1% in real terms. Okay, let's plug in our 4% example over here. So we said, okay, nominal terms, it went up by 4%. Plug it into your formula to get real. What'd you get? Real equals, if you remember, nominal minus inflation. So what do I get? I go, all right, so nominal terms in my made up example above, it went up by exactly 4%. They raised their price by 4%. Minus the inflation rate. What was the inflation rate in my made up example? It was 4%. 4 minus 4 is equal to 0%. In other words, in real terms, there's no change in real terms, yeah? That rules out B. In real terms, I just showed you with my made up example that it's no change. That leaves us for C and D. The most commonly selected answer was option C, and it's incorrect. Remain unchanged in nominal terms. I just proved that it does change in nominal terms by whatever inflation is. But just to kind of re-emphasize why that is the case, let's make up a different example. Give me another number for RPI. So now rather than 4%, let's say RPI in a given year was, let's say, 7%. Okay, remember what we do. The first thing we do is we always get nominal. And the way we get nominal is we just plug it into the formula. So it's 7%, RPI, 7%, sorry, plus K, which is equal to, in this example over here, 0%. It's obviously equal to 7%. What happened in nominal terms? In nominal terms, it didn't remain unchanged. In nominal terms, it went up by exactly whatever inflation was, in this case, 7%. It can't be C. So let's now plug it into the formula for real. Nominal minus inflation. Well, in nominal terms, I just worked out that it went up by 7%. 7%. Minus inflation. Well, that's RPI. What is the RPI in my example over here? 7% again. 7 minus 7 gives me 0. Notice that in both my examples, when RPI was 4 and when RPI was equal to 7, it went up in nominal terms or whatever inflation was, but in real terms, when I plugged it in, I kept getting 0. In this, the answer then is option D. Remain unchanged in real terms. If you got that right, by the way, very well done. A lot of people, the vast majority of the country that year, got that wrong. But hopefully, even if you got it wrong, that hopefully clarifies why the answer must be D. Right. If I were you guys, in terms of data response and being able to use this in an exam, other than this very difficult question, paper 1, June 2018, there's a 12 marker about forms of government intervention to help protect consumers in the energy market. One of the things they recommend is a price cap. So you can explain what the price cap is, say RPI minus X. This would limit how much firms are allowed to raise their price by. They're not allowed to raise it in line with inflation. This helps to protect consumers because in real terms, their prices are technically going down, I guess. Yeah? But anyways, I would recommend that you do that question. Hopefully that is really, really clear. And I'll see you guys for the next video.